Mouth breather. If what you come to YouTube for is predictability, I am definitely not the channel for you, and particularly not with this series. Unlike my usual off-the-cuff ramblings, these episodes require me to read a short story while remembering an audio play I've heard dozens of times, then listen to it again to make sure, and then record. Now, that's the first time that I've ever scripted an intro for one of my videos, and I'm not actually going to do quite the level of prep work that it said I was going to do, but I did do at least some prep work. So this is my copy of The Illustrated Man. It's a short story collection by Ray Bradbury, which contains 4 of the 13 Bradbury 13 stories. I have another book that has 2 of them, and then I'm going to have to buy more books in order to get the other stories so that I can do the side-to-side comparisons that I want to do. So this is going to be a very long story, and it's going to take a very long series, even if I only do like half of the episodes, which is a realistic possibility. I'm going to try to do them all, but I've tried many ambitious projects like that in the past. It's more important for me to successfully do one episode than to have a plan for doing all 13 that doesn't even get off the ground. So, without doing all of the prep work that I said I was going to do, I have at least refamiliarized myself with the story a little bit, and I will now talk about how it's different in the 2 versions. So, in my opinion, the Veldt is the episode we're discussing. It's one of the better-known stories Bradbury did, not just the Bradbury 13 subset, which is a very tiny percentage of his work, but just in general. If you said the name Ray Bradbury, there's a pretty good chance that an average person off the street might have at least a vague idea who he is. The number one thing that they're probably likely to have heard of is something about Mars, like he's famous for writing about Mars. The single story he's probably best known for is Something Wicked This Way Comes, but a lot of people won't know that for more than the title. And then some of his premises have kind of filtered into the cultural mainstream to such an extent that people will be vaguely aware of them, but not necessarily know the name of the story or have ever read it or know that Ray Bradbury was the author. They're just familiar with the concept of, an automated house that you push a button. You don't even have to push a button. Everything's just automated. Obviously, in modern real life, we've invented some of those concepts, but Ray Bradbury was writing about them well before they were anywhere near off the ground. And some of the things that he wrote about were pretty silly. One detail from the written story that didn't make it into the radio drama, and that's very good, is the idea that the multiple floors of the house are not connected by stairs or elevators, but rather by air flues that you step into and you get whisked by a puff of air up to the 2nd floor. That is a completely ridiculous concept. I have no idea what Bradbury was smoking. There is no possible version of that technology that could ever have worked. So that's pure silliness. The transition was not entirely to the audio credit, though. It's very difficult to analyze them side by side because the stories are structured completely different. They have a sequence that introduces the story elements very differently, and if I wasn't impatient to get this series rolling, I would diagram them next to each other and map out how the scenes compare to one another. But basically, the story, working from memory here, the story in its written form starts off with a conversation that doesn't happen until near the midpoint of the audio drama, which spends its beginning setting up the scenario. So Bradbury, the author, just expects you to pick up on what's going on in the course of the conversation, whereas the audio drama establishes first and foremost, which in my opinion is probably better for a storytelling perspective, but it may have depended on who your target audience was. Bradbury may have thought that it was better to trust the intelligence of his science fiction readers, whereas the audio drama was on NPR, and so it was assuming that the listeners were somewhat smart but might appreciate having a little more order to how the story introduces elements and then uses them after they've been introduced. So, one of the story gives very little attention in either of its versions to how exactly the illusion is created, and in both versions, one of the characters, Lydia, in both cases, I think, the wife, asks if there's a possibility that the scary lions from the children's playroom can possibly become real and can possibly escape the playroom, which is kind of a ridiculous concept. I think the story was written pre-television or maybe very early in the television era, but asking whether somebody can step off of your television screen and attack you is pretty obviously nonsense, and this is the equivalent of what she's asking. But this technology is so far beyond anything that she can wrap her head around that it seems like a reasonable question to her. And her husband, George, assures her that the question, he doesn't mock her for asking the question, but he says that obviously it can't happen, it's all just an illusion. The story, none of the versions of the story that I've experienced, and besides the Bradbury 13, I've heard at least one other radio adaptation, and I believe this one may also have been tackled by the Ray Bradbury Theater television show. Don't quote me on that, but I think they might have done this one as well, because, like I said, it is very famous. So in all the different versions, they never really clearly explore how exactly the playroom works. It's just sort of assumed. The original text from Bradbury, let me see if I can get it. I think I opened accidentally to the right place. No, I did not. Okay, the Veldt is the first story in the book, actually. Looking for a specific line. Aha. Oh, they look real, I must admit. Africa in your parlor. But it's all dimensional, super-reactionary, super-sensitive color film and mental tape film behind glass screens. It's all odorophonics and sonics. That's what Bradbury wrote. And so that tells us almost nothing. There's a machine making smells, and they don't at all address what a logistical nightmare that would be to get exactly the right smell in exactly the right part of the room, so you only smell it if you're there, and odor, air currents within the room would have to be controlled by the computer somehow to prevent that from getting mixed up. So they don't clarify. It's apparently a telepathic machine that is controlled by the mind, and part of the reason why the machine stops responding to the parents is that the children have done something to it, possibly messed with the machine physically, because they say that the boy is not supposed to be able to do that, but has done things like that in the past. So the basic thrust of the story in both versions is the concept that, one, the parents are drifting away from their children. The text story does a much better job of giving details of why, whereas in the audio, we hear the children snapping angrily at their parents, but a lot of the actual idea of why they feel abandoned is left completely unaddressed. There's a scene that I'm pretty sure was not in the text. I'm like 99.9% sure that the Brigham Young people invented this scene, but this was their way of getting across the idea of the children's alienation from their parents. The boy wants to go fishing with the father, and the father has been scheduled for extra work and can't go. One fun futuristic detail that appears in both versions of the story is that the employer sends a helicopter to pick the guy up because he's that important, but they need him physically in the office. The idea of remote work had never occurred to these people, so they send out a helicopter to pick up a very important person to come do work. And the child feels abandoned, and so he creates the lake that they were going to go fishing on, but as a result of his feelings of abandonment, the mind-reading machine causes the illusion of the lake to show the boy and his father in their little boat moving away from the actual boy and disappearing into the fog. And this makes the boy so angry that he causes an avalanche which fills in the entire lake, and then he says that was fun. So that little vignette, I think, does a pretty good job of showing the emotional journey that the children are going on as to why they feel abandoned, but it's interestingly completely different and it's very in just that moment, and it makes the children seem kind of psychotic that they go off the deep end that quickly. The story gives very interesting contrasting details about how the problems between the parents and children started about a year ago, or was it a year when they put in the playroom, and then the problems started a month ago? Anyway, relatively recently, but a little ways in the past, the parents asked to go to New York by rocket, another of those futuristic transportation details that seems silly now. And they wanted to go, and the parents said, no, you're not old enough. And somewhere around the same time, for possibly that reason or unrelated reasons, or there's a connection that isn't spelled out, the father locked the playroom. In the audio drama, he locks the playroom for the first time towards the end, and there's no mention of him having done it before that I can recall. But in the text, he had done so in the past and had really annoyed the children, and they said they hated him. So both versions of the story in different ways, like with different sequences that, again, I really could have just mapped out and diagrammed. I might have to do a sequel to this episode where I actually do that, if I ever have time. But the idea is that there's this history of punishment, and as a result of not being allowed to do what they wanted to do, the children started spiraling into fantasy and became more and more dependent upon the playroom, and more exclusively used the playroom just to do Africa. Again, there are some differences between the two versions as to the exact details of how that goes down. In the text, they call up a story called Rima, which I'm not familiar with. It must have been popular at the time. And so they make Africa go away, and Rima is there, and it's very stupid in the way it's set up, because the parents are suspicious of the children, but they allow the children to go to the playroom to prove that there's no Africa, and leave the children alone while the children tell the room to not be Africa anymore. It's very, very dumb. So that version being out of the audio version is a definite step forward. Probably second for stupidity only to the air flues between floors of the house. I feel like I'm doing a really bad job of this because I did not prepare more and just went, okay, well, it's time for me to do this now, so I'd better throw myself into it. But hopefully this discussion of the version differences, as incomplete and disorganized as it is, will give you at least an idea of what I'm hoping to do with this series. So I have a lot more to say about certain specific episodes. The Veldt is one of my least favorite episodes of Bradbury 13. Consistently has gone down in how much I enjoy it with every listen to it.
because it's an interesting premise. It's a cool what if question where I don't agree with the answer. The idea that you could tell a compelling story under these circumstances makes a lot of sense, but the fact that the story is so fixated on Africa, which was probably cool when Bradbury was a child in like the 1920s, and even by the time he wrote the story, I don't think kids would have wanted to play in Africa, and by now it's a completely ridiculous idea to say that what a kid wants is to go watch lions feasting on a bloody zebra. There's probably some kids who will go on YouTube and look at that sort of thing, but the idea that they would just exclusively do that all of the time, it's a little nonsense. So this story, interesting premise, long before Star Trek existed, let alone before they added the holotech in Star Trek the Next Generation. This was a holodeck kind of idea. Bradbury was probably not the only writer of the period who came up with such a thing, but he did one of the more seminal versions of it, and then the Star Trek version was very probably influenced by that. But he did it for this weird lesson in child psychology and a subset of his broader theme of being a Luddite and saying it's a bad idea to make a house where machines just do everything so that the people are sitting around doing nothing all the time. There's some truth in that idea, but it's a background element in this story, and it's handled with a degree of lack of subtlety that TV Tropes likes to refer to with the term anvilicious, as in it drops an anvil on your head with the intensity of the message. So, not well handled, and as a result, this story, I used to put it at about number 8, and now I would probably have slid it down to about number 10, where it's just on the border of being one of the 3 bad episodes that I would say. In fact, I'm not even sure I can think of 3 episodes I like less. This one might have slid to well, let's see here. Yes, there are definitely 3 episodes that I think are less good than this one. So this one's going to be number 10. And before it was 8 or 7. It wasn't 6, I'm pretty sure. Hell, it may have been 6 the first time I made this list. If so, then it has really, really plummeted in my estimations. But even if it was 8, it has definitely gone down. So, I don't know why I'm talking so much about something that nobody cares about. So this has been a largely failed attempt at the first episode of Burying the Brad. There's a story behind that name, which I may or may not bother to explain at some point, because it's unlikely anybody's ever going to see this series or care. But if there are viewers who want to know where I came up with the story, then I will either slide it into one of the episodes or make a specific video talking about it. But for right now, this is just me taking the second step, and I've started a lot of journeys and never made it past the first step. So this episode is important in my personal history as a creative, intellectual pundit, whatever you want to call me. Even if it's not very good, it is progress, and I have a hard enough time making any of that as it is. So hopefully this is at least a good start.